Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, Freddie Gray. 3 people killed by police officers in 3 very different circumstances, but yet with 3 very similar outcomes. In all 3 cases, the families got multi-million-dollar payouts from the cities where they happened. Now, Cleveland just agreed to pay Rice's family, the 12-year-old, $6 million to settle the lawsuit they filed. For those who don't remember, police shot and killed a 12-year-old boy who was holding just a toy gun. None of the cops involved were even indicted. In New York City, they settled the Eric Garner's family, agreeing to pay out just under $6 million. The cops involved there didn't get charged. In Baltimore, they settled with the family of Freddie Gray to the tune of $6.4 million. Gray, he died from a spinal injury after police arrested him and took him for a ride in the police van. 6 cops in that case have been charged. Now, how are these settlements orchestrated within the system? And guys, I'll speak from a broader narrative, and I could be completely, you guys could disagree with me completely or not. When I saw the Tamir Rice case, rather the settlement, the first thing I thought, Amy, was there's a pattern here. If it's involved a police officer, unlike some guy who shot the kid in the park, every single person hopefully comes to the conclusion police didn't set out that day to kill the kid. But yet, in the particular case of Cleveland, there was such recklessness that was involved, misinformation that didn't go from the 911 operator to the officer. The officer, if you went into his jacket, how he was removed from a prior police force because of bad judgment here, temper, and all the other things, and expressed and used zero discretion when he came up upon the scene. I'm not trying to litigate the case over again. But do you think we've gotten to a point where even a jury knows you bring the case in, and no matter whatever happens in the criminal portion, there's going to be a big settlement at the back end? Yeah. So there'll be some form of, even if you don't want to call it justice, there'll be some form of compensation for the family, so it makes it easier to either not indict, let alone convict the cop on the stand.
Well, somebody's behind the scenes doing the math, and obviously they felt that the police department would ultimately be liable for more than they settled for. That's why they're trying to get themselves a deal. I mean, you have allegations of failure to train, failure to conduct proper background checks, and you even said, you know, the guy that shot and killed him, the police officer, he had displayed emotional instability during a firearms training exercise, and he was deemed unfit to be a police officer. Then his partner, they had an excessive force lawsuit settled against the partner. So who in the world decided to team these 2 guys up? I mean, they arrive on the scene within less than 2 seconds before the police car even comes to a halt. This guy's shooting out the window and killing this kid. And then neither of them even bother to administer first aid or CPR. So that says a lot. So that's why there was a settlement, because the police department is trying to cut a deal here and save themselves.
Do you think when the jury gets, they go back into deliberations, that whether it's spoken or just tacitly understood, that unlike 2 guys who get into some random guy stabbed the kid in the park, right? The family, even if they don't send the guy away who pulled the trigger, in this case the cop, the family's still going to do okay, I'm putting that in quotes, because there's going to be a big check at the end of the day.
Do the jurors feel that way? Is it in the back of the jurors' mind?
I mean, have we seen enough of these cases that that's part of the thinking at this point?
I found that jurors, I mean, in my experience, I've found that jurors really do follow the instructions of the law, and that's solely what they focus on. And even when we see a lack of, you know, indictments or a lack of jury verdicts that we feel are just, a lot of times there's a fault in the law, and the jurors are just following the law to a T the way they should, but the laws are not equipped to handle that type of a case. But I think the larger failure here is with the grand jury system. It favors police officers. I mean, defendants usually are not put on notice that they're about to be indicted, but police officers are. And if a defendant knows, they can testify before the grand jury, so they have an advantage. Plus, the grand jurors are used to listening to police officers. They're the only people they hear from. So if you have a police officer testifying and the jurors are used to listening to them as good guys, they're obviously going to have an advantage.
Well, it's a matter of the presentation, and that's what we saw in the Garner case. That's what we saw in the other case. You know, the DA decides what to put in. And so the grand jurors only hear what's put in.
And
but I want to focus on the settlement, though, Jimmy, which is
payoff.
That's the word exactly I was about to say next. It feels that way to me when I saw $6 million. It's not that I don't think the family deserves $6 million or whatever. it felt dirty. It felt like what happened to that kid that day, we all know is awful, but the wheels of justice didn't work, and here's a check, go along your way. To the point where my cynicism now is on high. Does the attorney representing the defendant, representing the victim's family, okay, have a conversation where, in effect, don't scream bloody murder, don't ask for rioting in the streets here, don't worry, at the end of the day, you'll be taken care of?
No, I think that they were aghast at the fact that there was no indictment in this case. I think that affected them tremendously. And I think that the fact of the settlement is just a fact of our system, irrespective of how the criminal justice system works. It is not a good time for these cases when it comes to the cities that represent or that have to pay these payouts.
But the cities get insurance. I mean, they take insurance out. There's a fund that they set aside every year to set these cases aside where they have to make settlements and the rest.
That fund would be wiped out by a jury verdict. Wiped out.
Listen, I agree with aspects that both of my colleagues have said, and disagree with aspects as well. In response to the original question, no, I don't think. I agree with what Amy said, that they generally follow the law and decide cases on the basis of the law as applied to the facts. All you have to do is look at the Lang case, right? We just saw a jury convict a police officer in a case that even the judge thought was negligence as opposed to recklessness, and a juror who was actually combative with the judge in the post-trial hearing because he was outraged that the penalty was being diminished. So I think juries can decide these cases, first of all. With respect to the lawyers defending the deceased's family in Cleveland, I know these lawyers. You know, they're making grandstanding pronouncements that they want this to be to spur sweeping change in the police systems across the country. With respect to my colleagues, that's nonsense, because if you want to spur sweeping change as opposed to cashing in, try the case, air the whole thing out, because you have to prove a pattern and practice of misconduct, and you can bring in all the other cases that the Cleveland PD was allegedly involved in based on race.
I don't think trying the case is going to cause sweeping change. We need to look at the grand jury system, and we need to look at police training. I mean, the law, changes to the law. This isolated case isn't going to do it, and it's not going to stop independent movements like Black Lives Matter. They're going to keep going, so it's not like they think this is going to hush people up.
That the grand jury system is in need of reform the other way, which is that it doesn't provide enough protections, especially here in New York. There's a massive grand jury movement afoot that it doesn't provide enough protections for anybody, because originally, of course, it was conceived as a protection for all defendants, cops, criminal defendants alike.
Well,
it's basically a rubber stamp.
I'm glad that there is some compensation for the family, but Jimmy used a word that, at least intuitively, it felt like a payoff when the check came in.
Because you can't, but you're not going to bring the little boy back.
No,
That's
but
the
it's
problem.
No, you can't.
to stop the noise and to limit the financial exposure.
Yep.
You know, because to the extent, to
I
Mark's
gotta hear
point, you're stopping the noise. If you try the case, you're still airing it out,
Yep.
and it only makes things
Right,
worse.
but if the
For the
grand
sentiment
jury
of
isn't
the
doing
public.
its job, or the prosecutors aren't there doing their jobs,
All right.
private attorneys are supposed to be private deputies, attorney general. Try the case, air it out. You'll get more money if you win. Obviously, they don't want to take that chance.
Coming up next, tough segue here, but I'm going to shift to football here. It looks like Tom Brady is at the end of the line and will serve that 4-game suspension for Deflategate. 2 judges upheld the commissioner's ruling, but the dissenting judge railed on the commissioner. I got problems with that one. We'll be back with that after this.